We in the men's movement speak a great deal about male disposability as well as the concept of precarious manhood, that is, the preoccupation with men's status in which a man seems to have to socially prove that he is a man constantly, as opposed to women who seem to just be, say, at a certain stage in their life at least. I have to confess, however, that as much as this sort of thing is being talked about, I wonder about some people, some men rather, who try to derive a sort of vicarious validation about the disposability of men and the fact that they have to prove themselves sometimes to unreasonable lengths for the sake of pleasing society and particularly women. Some men say men are disposable because it's the way we've evolved, or we've evolved to care about women and not about men. Now, this may sound defeatist, which it is intrinsically. However, it seems to be a way to derive some sense of martyrdom. The more disposed of they are, the better they feel about themselves. What should be a lament is utilized instead as a promotion of a status quo with the scientific validation of evolution studies. I do in fact question whether those that talk about male disposability in this way have any serious ambitions in promoting men's and boys' autonomy from disposability, or do they just want to be thanked more for said disposability to make it worth their while? One interpretation I've heard recently was an attempt to explain the evolution of social roles of men and women as thus: men's role was to kill or be killed, and women's role was to love and be loved. From such a postulate, we can derive this: women are valuable for merely being, merely existing, and men, for the sake of the survival of any given unit, must kill to protect said unit, or dispose of themselves in the attempt. Women become love objects, or sex objects, depending on the context, and men become death objects. In a darker twist of the phrase, women are human beings, men are human doings, it could be more accurately reiterated as: women are human beings, men are human dyings. The value of men, if this mantra I've related now is followed, is in their valuelessness as human beings, their sheer worthlessness as individuals. The value of men then becomes measured by their disposability, or how well they dispose those outside the unit. The value of men is based on how these men die or make other men die. How is that for precarious manhood? You die if you're not man enough, but if you don't die, then you're no man. Of course, feminists, when convenient for themselves, would profess to care about this sort of thing by blaming it on toxic masculinity, hegemonic masculinity, testosterone poisoning, and masculinity in general. I don't think there's a masculinity they won't blame. You'll find no scenario in which they would argue for an actual increase in masculinity as opposed to a decrease, no maintenance of masculinity as opposed to just getting rid of it. Just like traditional conservative women who downright admit that life was wonderful in the good old days in which men were women's servants while the women lounged about in the household that they performed less work in. The feminist merely demands masculinity when it is of a utilitarian value for the immediate quality of life, until they are no longer needed. Men are demanded their sacrifice, their loss of self, in other words, by women on both sides of this horseshoe. When women define what is masculine, or at least what is non-toxically masculine, to hear it from the feminist side at least, masculinity is defined consistently as sacrificial behavior on the part of men. Tradcons are more gleeful about how their man must sacrifice themselves to please womankind or be a real man, with the added bonus of thanking them for their sacrifice. Feminists, on the other hand, likewise demand that men sacrifice themselves, though primarily because they actually want to see masculinity mitigated at best and obliterated at worst. Both can be said to share the same mantra, however: the only good man is a dead man. The only good man is a death object. When men define what is masculine, sadly, most of the answers they come up with mirror the women's answers talking about the sacrifice. As I've stated before, this is a sort of self-validation and resignation about their disposability for the sake of women's approval and trying to grab all the benefits and social net positives that they can get from calling themselves disposable. Not unlike religious premises of heavenly rewards if they die as a believer or a crusader, these men practice a strange hybrid of defeatism and pride because they are the disposable sex. How useful to society they must be for their sacrifice. It is their duty they're born into as men to protect the allegedly weak, the women. And so they must shape other men to be equally disposable, all at the behest of the supposedly weak women of society. Again, men must be death objects in order to fit into the societal norm. Now, I mentioned this in my ICMI 20 video last year, but I found it puzzling when certain people respond to feminist misandry by saying that, but men sacrifice themselves for society. Men die for you, so you should be thankful for men. Why are we trying to please feminists here who are wrong about basically everything? The feminist keeps on saying men are toxic and have always been oppressors of women. Yes, all men, they should be more like women. But the tradcon, for some reason, thinks this is a good argument. But men sacrifice themselves for the benefit of society. They've always been this way, and it's in our instinct to risk dying to protect and provide for you. You should be thankful. Well, the feminist is going to probably be thankful about that. They're probably going to say, good, men should sacrifice themselves. Kill all men. Look, there's no upside in trying to please a feminist. Knock it off. The only proper way to advocate for men's issues is to make the argument that men and boys are worthy of being valued by self and others, whole and unsacrificed. Those that appeal on the behalf of men because they are disposable and sacrificial have no business talking about men's issues. And you can't persuade one who doesn't even esteem men to begin with. You're not going to do that. Nobody respects one who degrades himself for the sake of the person they're trying to earn the respect from. A bit of advice to my fellow men's issues advocates. You won't earn a bit of respect by degrading mankind as the sacrificial half of the human race, designed to die for the other half. At best, you and mankind will be condescended upon, well, more than usual, and at worst, they'll thank you for it. Right, I'm going to piss off a lot of people right here, but I don't care. I think it takes a sick personality to thank someone for their sacrifice. A sacrifice is the trading of an object of value for a lesser value or non-value. A sacrifice, by design, is a loss undertaken to appease others. When you compromise your principles, beliefs, way of life, and any aspect of your bodily autonomy, as well as your intellectual integrity, that is by design a sacrifice. The social net positives, the approval by society you're conforming to, comes at the cost of your soul. Your own desires for your own life subjugated by the will of the many just so you'll fit in. What kind of a life is that? What kind of a soul is that? How intact is it? No individualist worth his salt will prioritize fitting in above that which he knows to be true and his own rights as a human individual. So it's bad enough to expect sacrifice from somebody, let alone a whole sex as a group. It's insult added to injury to thank him for that sacrifice. Gratitude is a joyous emotion, or at least it should be. Imagine then one who thanks somebody for having self-sacrificed. Imagine deriving gratitude, deriving joy at the breaking, if not death, of this person. You've lost your life, or your physical well-being, your physical integrity, your dreams, all for the sake of me. Thank you, that's so awesome. It's been said that gratitude is the payoff for men having to risk their lives and die. They would be honored, especially if they had died in a war, for instance. Sad to see that it takes dying for such an honor, but the point is, men have been incentivized by all intents and purposes, by women, to die in this way, or make themselves disposable. Men are expected, at the very least, to be broken with the promise of some social reward. Tradcons lament the fact that the social rewards appear to be gone and men's sacrifices are taken for granted, but still go on to maintain the status quo of men's disposability for their own gynocentric ends. They derive some sick satisfaction from the fact that men are or should be death objects, while women are still the fairer sex to be valued for morsels of their attention. I would go as far as to say that the fact that the social rewards are gone is just a revelation of the true face of the conformist society that demands altruism as a moral standard. Male disposability and sacrifice, which are acts of male self-abnegation by definition, have gone from being expected and thanked to merely expected. The only true response is the opposite of thanking men for their sacrifice again. The only true response is to stop sacrificing for society and go your own way and achieve great things because you want to and live the way you want to for yourself while respecting others to do the same. The only true reason to stop sacrificing is not because you aren't being thanked enough anymore for it, but because for society to do so much as expect you to abnegate yourself for the greater good of society is wrong. And it's always been wrong. If a woman lists self-sacrifice as a masculine virtue, she is dangerous. Steer clear from her. If a man lists self-sacrifice as a masculine virtue, he is dangerous. He is no brother to you. If anybody lists self-sacrifice as a masculine virtue, know this: they intend you to be sacrificial towards their own ends, and such is the nature of altruism. If we should be thanking men for anything, it's that they are unabashedly themselves, and that their very existence is an act of self-affirmation and defiance of society's wish of conformism. Thank them for living. In this world in which male suicide is a massive problem, perhaps this can help them. No more thanking men for dying, for being death objects. No more thanking men for sacrificing themselves. Let's start thanking them for choosing to live, and choosing to live for themselves at that. Let's start thanking them for being them. Alright, let's backtrack here and talk about that phrase that has some unfortunate popularity. Women are human beings, men are human doings. In what describes precarious manhood to a T, it makes clear and simple that women are of worth and value simply for existing, whereas men have to prove all the time by doing one thing or another that they are a man. Let's take it to a further conclusion. Women have to prove nothing, implying that they can do no wrong, and men have to prove that they exist or are of some kind of value. The more you think about it, this is almost a statement of male subhumanity, in which women are the humans and men are short of that by default. If anything expresses Gynocentric's female supremacy, it's this phrase. Women in the men's movement, women who aren't but also don't readily buy into the feminist talking points of female oppression, and men who sadly take too much of a gynocentric approach when arguing against feminism and political correctness, love to talk in defense of women's agency, right? Now, of course, they're right when they do. It is the truth that women have agency, and to brand women's legacy as the eternally oppressed in history is, in fact, an insult to women's agency. All true. But what does this mean for anyone to have agency? Agency is defined in the social and psychological contexts as when individuals take action independently, utilizing their own free will, in other words. But agency is about action, and action is all about doing. If women speak about their agency as women, they should be freely willing to admit that they are not merely human beings, but human doings as well, like us guys. The acknowledgement of women's agency is rightfully abandonment of women's sense of entitlement in society. We can then toss women are human beings, men are human doings completely out the window and let it lacerate itself on the broken glass, as far as I'm concerned, if we recognize women as agents. The case for women's agency should not depend primarily on the fact that feminism insults it. It's true, it does insult it, but it's not the first truth. But rather, the fact of the matter is that without agency, women are creatures of entitlement and mindless, futile worship on the part of condescending, subhuman men. Women's agency is the recognition that men are not born as women's servants, laborers, and sacrificial death objects. As for men and their intrinsic value, just as there are many things intrinsic to women and girls in particular, the same is true for men and boys. The sheer lust for life to be a part of the action and to mold the world as how he sees fit and make his mark is something that is true to men and boys. Masculinity could very well be about the act of bringing to reality everything that is about the man into this world. Masculinity is about seeing oneself come to life in the world. Masculinity is about living. It is about life. It is not about death and sacrifice.